Morning, everybody. So I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine who got out of a long-term relationship not too long ago. He took some time for himself, and lately he's been starting dating, and he was telling me about his experiences, and for the most part they were wonderful. But then he got into these parts that were a little more challenging or crunchy or conflicted, and he was like, what's going on? And I found myself, I said, because attachment. And I found myself explaining it to him in a way that was kind of new to me. And it turned out to be really helpful for him too. So I wanted to take a minute to share it here because it's super simple. It's what to keep in mind about attachment when you're dating. So it's just an image. It's a simple image. So those ropes that you can get at like U-Haul when it's time to move, they're very thin, but they're made up of hundreds of tiny nylon fibers, for example, but they braid them together and they form this really strong rope. So keep one of those in mind. So this is going to represent the emotional bond that forms between two people who are connecting in an intimate way over time. So as we connect intimately, again and again and again, an emotional bond starts to form between us. And this is an emotional, psychological, even physiological phenomenon. It happens within our nervous system, inside the circuits that are referred to as the social nervous system. It's actually a biological event. It becomes like another body part in truth. Okay, so imagine this rope is starting to form between you and another person. But rather than just like kind of wrapping around and tying a knot around the other person, here's the image. Here's where it gets a little interesting. So imagine that the end of that rope kind of frays, and the hundreds of little filaments or threads or whatever, they sort of fan out. And now imagine that they kind of plug into that person in the heart, and every single one of those little filaments starts to run along, right alongside of and even wrap itself around every single nerve in that other person's body. This is a good image for what attachment is like and how it innervates into our bodies. Okay, so now what we have is we have two people with that rope going in between them, and then at the end it sort of unravels itself, the rope does, and it winds itself into the nervous system of each of these people. Okay, so now this is, so at this point, now we enter both the like wonderful, weird, and wild parts of being intimately connected to another person. Because when this bond is healthy and both people are taking care of it and both people are like aware of it and seeking to make sure that the bond itself is healthy and stable and robust and getting what it needs, then this is when we have this sort of astronomically supportive effects of a secure attachment. There's just an endless amount of research that shows healthy relationships are the number one positive supporter of our physical, mental, emotional well-being. Every measure of well-being you could think of is boosted by having relationships like this in your life. So it's really important. But where we kind of go off the rails with all of this is that if we don't know that, if we aren't really thinking about that bond, or we don't know how to be aware of it or take care of it, like most of us don't, when do we ever get taught this stuff, right? So no big deal, but here's what happens. So there's two attachment styles, right? Or of the insecure varieties. There's the avoidant and the anxious. So if an avoidant person finds themselves in a bond like this, the bonding itself and the closeness eventually is going to feel suffocating and scary and invasive and not good. It kicks up a lot of icky feelings. And so their strategy is to pull back and get away. But what this does is it takes that rope and it yanks on it. It just yanks on every single nerve in the body of the person at the other end of the rope. And that's going to kick up so many icky feelings in that person's body that even if they have a secure attachment style, they might start to like, where are you going? Get kind of anxious and clingy. And oh goodness, this is the last thing that poor avoidant person needs, because that feels like even more invasion, even more suffocation. So then they pull back even more. This is the classic, pursuer distancer thing that we see in romantic relationships, right? So, but then the other end of the spectrum, the anxiously attached, when they have that bond or that connection, even if the person on the other end of the rope is a securely attached person and is taking care of the bond, sometimes folks have enough trauma around their early attachments that even if it's safe, it's hard to trust that. And there's so much fear stored in the body that they can't quite recognize that they're safe. So then they're going to be tugging on the rope in the opposite direction, saying, come closer, I'm not okay. And so even if the person on the other end of their rope is a securely attached person, they might wind up being like, hold on a second, this is invasive, right? And so when you get an avoidant person who's, pulling away, and an anxious person who's pulling in, that's where we sort of get the most intense struggle in the attachment dynamic. Okay, so what to remember then about attachment when you're dating is that we form these ropes, these emotional bonds, in so many ways, right? Just saying like, I'm not going to have sex with somebody till the third date is not going to prevent attachment. Attachment bonds can form in the process of having deeply connected, revealed conversations with one another. It can happen by sharing beautiful or exciting experiences together, like whitewater rafting or like a gorgeous sunset. And so what else? So deeply connected conversations, beautiful or exciting experiences, even just sleeping in the same bed together. There's something like when we fall asleep, that's when we're at our most vulnerable. We're going to go into a place where we voluntarily let go of our consciousness and control of our bodies. And so like when we do that, and then we're just sort of steeping in one another's, energy fields, like that's very connecting. So the point I'm trying to make here is that as you're dating, I want you to keep in mind, like, is a rope forming here? Because inevitably it is. If you're dating with any kind of depth, you're forming a rope, a bond, a real bond, and it's plugging into their physical body. And so then it becomes just kind of responsible and kind to tend to that rope. And it's not hard. It looks like reaching out the next day after a really connected evening together. It looks like making time for one another in a consistent way rather than kind of leaving it up to like, are I ever going to hear from them again, right? It's like knowing how to nourish and reassure and just sort of create a robust interpersonal connection. It's not really about them. You're not taking care of them per se. You're taking care of the bond. And if you do this in the dating phase or the dating process, the person on the other end of your rope is going to be happy and chill and open. That's the thing, is that when that bond is okay, we're better able to give one another space. It's only when we're like, oh, I'm scared about this bond, that we that space becomes even more threatening. So if you're wanting space, freedom, ease, also, if you're wanting closeness and love, the best thing that we can do is take care of the bond itself. And if you're not willing to do that, if that feels like too much work, then I think it's kind of irresponsible to be inviting people to bond with you. Okay, personal opinion. So, final thoughts here. Attachment bonds are emotional, physiological, I would even say spiritual things. They're things. They become like any other body part. And when we learn how to notice, right? This is just an awareness thing. We learn how to notice when that bond is starting to form. And it can form in so many different ways. And it starts to form far earlier than most people realize. And so when we can take care of that bond in a good way right from the beginning of dating, then dating gets to be this wonderful, delightful, surprising, magical process. And we don't have to have oh, I don't feel safe, or oh, I can't breathe. We don't have to do any of that if both people are willing to tend to the bond that's in between us. Okay, that's all I got. I hope it's helpful.